me switch to this camera. All right. You're hearing me? You're hearing me? Check, check. Okay. What is that sound? Can you move away and see? Okay.
It's really weird. So
What is
on
that
the live
sound?
stream,
What is this? I'm not sure what this sound is.
oh, your orientation is finished.
Okay, the squeaking is gone. That's good.
Squeaking is gone. That's good. Squeaking is gone. That's good.
Do you have the external microphone on that or not?
No, I wasn't getting anything to, I wasn't hearing anything. We could try it again. I'm just going to walk around with it. Okay, I'm going to put this, I'm going to try this microphone again. See if it works. Can you see if you can hear me on the live stream? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Try again. Try again. Can you hear me? Okay. Good. Haley, let me...
It's not as bad as it was before.
Okay, good. That will work then. I'm going to flip it to landscape and see, does it change the landscape on your side?
It's better that way. Then
Yeah.
you can.
And turn off your chat. Just hit the X button. Now flip it. There you go. Can you see it in landscape?
The picture of the room for me is sideways, it's vertical.
Yeah, I think I set it up wrong. All right. I guess it looks like we have a lot of people on the live stream. So if you could just hold that and then take it to anyone who has a question.
Sure.
Okay. I guess there may be some more people coming in. Thanks everybody for coming, and we have a good several presenters tonight to pose ideas and ask questions, and you may also ask questions. Right now I'm going to introduce someone who's been involved in our local food scene for quite some time, Meighan Lovelace, and she's brought John Eichert to speak with us. He's on the screen. And after John, we have Tasch. So I don't know if any one of you have seen the movie How We Grow, but Meighan was prominently there explaining all about food justice and legislation in the state of Colorado for getting food justice and getting more local food production happening. I'm going to let you go, Nikki, and I'm going to speak to you.
Hi guys, my name is Meighan Lovelace, and thanks for coming together today to talk about food sovereignty. And so we have today with us John Eichert. He is a professor emeritus of agricultural economics from the University of Missouri. He spent 30 years at 4 different state universities before retiring in 2000. For the past 30 years, he's worked on issues related to economics and agricultural sustainability. If any of you had seen the trailer for Right to Harm, you've seen John Eichert advocating for the rights of the earth and its people and all of us as eaters. And so today John's going to speak a bit about the community food utility model as something that we could implement right here in the Roaring Fork. And so with that, I will hand it over to John.
Okay, thank you very much, Meighan. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you tonight by Zoom call. Talked about community food utilities, and what I want to focus on tonight is using community food utilities to achieve community food sovereignty. And by sovereignty, I don't mean community self-sufficiency. I simply mean having sufficient control over the local food system that you're not at the mercy of everyone else, and you have the ability to choose how to bring in the community and how much of it you want to produce and supply within. So you might ask the question to begin with, well, why should we have a public utility to do something like food? Well, I think you begin by recognizing that the lack of food security today is because we allow economic efficiency. We've relied on the kind of the free market economy, or what we call a free market economy provider of food. And it's simply more economically efficient to produce food in large specialized operations scattered around the country and around the world, and to ship food to a lot of places that end up not having food security and not producing very much of their food very close by. A public utility allows a community then to insulate a certain part of activity, the activity that's covered by the utility, to insulate that from the market economy. And that's the key thing that I'm talking about here. Because whenever you try to do anything that's different from what the market would do, a more efficient economic system would do, you're always going to run into obstacles, and particularly in the U.S. when we talk about interstate commerce and things of that nature in terms of laws. Now, we have public utilities for services such as water and electricity and sewer. And these are considered to be essential services that, for one reason or another, the markets simply won't provide. And I think when I'm talking about a community food utility, it's more like public transportation. And in this case, the markets or the private sector does provide transportation, but it doesn't provide it for everyone. I mean, everyone's not able to afford to move around and to do the things that we feel that everyone has a right to do within a democratic society. In reality, public utilities are justified in any case where there is a market failure. And water, electricity, sewers are market failures because what economists we call they're natural monopolies. Makes sense to only have one of those. But I think public transportation is not a monopoly, but still public transportation is justified because there are certain people that can't afford cars. They're not at particular locations where they can get other public services that's provided by the private providers. And so the community, the city, takes over and provides public transportation as a public service using the concept of public utility. Now, what I've suggested in terms of focusing on food security or food sovereignty, that we begin by focusing on the issue of hunger or food security, because that's an issue very much like transportation. The private sector provides food for people, but it doesn't provide food for everyone. And we have a hunger or food security problem in the country, in many areas of the country, like where I live now in Fairfield, Iowa. We have almost 20% of our children living in food insecure homes. So there's food for a lot of us that can afford to buy it, but not for everyone, just like we have a need for public transportation. Now, the important part of focusing on hunger as a place to begin is it's already recognized that that's a market failure. So we have government programs, government food assistance programs of various kinds in order to provide food security, but it simply hasn't done it. Because the federal programs and even the state programs that we have now to provide food security are very much like markets. They're impersonal bureaucracies. And there's no sense of personal connectedness and responsibility between the people that are paying for the programs and the people who receive the benefits. What I'm suggesting is you use the idea that there are government funds available to provide food security for low-income people and people that can't afford it. You use that to build a foundation for a local food system. Because by going through public utilities, you can say that we're going to get food that goes into this public utility to provide food for the hungry. We're going to get the food to the extent that we can from local farmers. And we're going to give preference to local farmers, which we wouldn't be able to do under interstate commerce and existing laws. And that we're going to create a local sustainable food system. And we're going to provide people with healthful, nutritious food that's produced in sustainable ways, which is part of the definition then of food sovereignty. So we can focus then and kind of insulate from the markets, focus on local farms, sustainably produced foods, and we can have an inclusive kind of management structure so that everyone has an opportunity to participate, what I call a vertical cooperative. We have the people that were receiving the food and the people that are providing the food, and government officials would all be kind of on a board of directors that would determine who produces what and what they're paid and so on. So you have total community input. You can make it voluntary for those that are on food assistance today. You can use the government funds that are allocated to begin to support the utility. People will be voluntary. But you could also open it up as with public transportation, and those in the community that can afford to pay the full cost without any government assistance, then they could participate in the market and grow the market and move beyond just simply providing food security for the low income to providing food sovereignty for the whole community. So that's what I had to say, Meighan, if you want to take it from there.
Thank you, John, and we'll keep you for questions. I'm going to take this concept and bring it back home right here to the Roaring Fork Valley. Has anybody ever seen those shirts that say farming is a public service? I think some of you maybe even have them. So when we look at our farmers and our open spaces, preserving our views, preserving our food sovereignty, what we're looking at is supporting a network of local farmers. And through this community food utility, with the vertical integration of a cooperative, we've already seen this model working within our system throughout the valley, where we are intentionally supporting our local agriculture producers. By creating a model that has that vertical cooperative integration, what it does is it gives everyone an opportunity to receive that food in what we create as a fair market for the Roaring Fork Valley. It also brings parity back to farmers when we look at making sure that as we pay for these locally produced foods, that the farmers are being paid a living wage. And really, so that is creating its own sustainable system. And so today, I hope that we can have a dialogue with myself and the room and John specifically in regards to what does a community food utility look like in our community, because we have so many people that are passionately investing in knowing where their food comes from, preserving the beautiful place that they live, and supporting their neighbors. So I want to open up the floor to questions in regards to how you see weaving together some of already the existing pieces that we have and building off of that to really look at the way that we're supporting each other in the process. Eating food, which we all do every single day. Gwen.
Meighan, is there, are there models of this working other places, I'm assuming?
John, are there models existing currently?
Well, they always ask this question, and my answer is not that I know of, but every time I think I've come up with a unique idea for something, I always find out someone else is doing it. But I will say that the, Metro Caring in Denver, Colorado is very much interested in this, and I'm in the process now. They've looked at sort of a feasibility study, and they're putting together a project, a grant proposal, and they think they have a sponsor in mind to sponsor a grant that would do a feasibility study in somewhere in the Denver area with a community there. They have a fresh market already, and they would kind of center the utility on their fresh market. So they're very much interested in moving ahead with something there. There's another organization or another movement up in northern Iowa, Wisconsin, northern Illinois that's called the Agricultural Cities Initiative. A fellow by the name of Robert Wood. And, you know, he has a book called The Agricultural Cities, but he's very much in this same mode of achieving food security, overall economic security for his area there in what's called the driftless area. So there's a couple, and then also there's a group at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. They're interested in moving ahead with it. But I can't show you a community now that's already doing this. I'm just saying that there are 3 or 4 communities that I know of that are interested in pursuing the concept.
And to add to that, Metro Caring in Denver, we're looped in the conversation. If we decide that this is a model that we'd like to explore and move forward with, Metro Caring will be bringing John out to Colorado to work. And they have agreed to support John to come here so that we're doing the work in tandem. So we're not doing it in a silo. Even though we understand that the environments are very different, these are beta tests for really looking at how each individual community can obtain food sovereignty. It also gives us an opportunity to bounce our ideas back and forth and to continue to utilize John's expertise if we decide to move forward growing this model as a community. What else do we got? Gwen?
Wondering if there's a production per capita kind of threshold that would then allow this to be viable. I mean, I'm just wondering if our level of production here would support this kind of being worth doing at this point.
Production per capita in a rural community, when does it become viable at the community level to participate in a community food utility in a sustainable way?
What's the question here?
Production per capita?
It's just a way of kind of thinking about it. But, you know, is there a level of production that makes this work?
Is there a level of production required to have a community food utility be a useful component?
Yeah, I think you could start at almost any level. I think the thing is to get the structure in place, because you obviously when you start, let's say you're going to focus on hunger issue, you're not going to be able to produce enough food locally to even meet like 15-20% of the people if everybody decided to go with this program right off. And so you're going to have to be bringing in some food from the outside. But with sovereignty, you can choose this. And so the food that you bring in while you're building the local system, then you can insist, okay, this is nutritious food. It's produced in sustainable ways. It's not produced here, but you don't rely on the market to determine how much you get locally and how much you get on the outside. That's a decision that's made within the utility. And so it gives you an opportunity to grow the local production base in a profitable way. You know, you can pay them cost of production plus a reasonable return, and it gives you an opportunity to grow the local production base. And as you grow the local production base, you're bringing in less and less from the outside all the time. And you probably still want to bring in some food from the outside that you can't produce locally. As I said, food sovereignty doesn't say self-sufficiency. It just says you want to grow that local food system to the point where it's meeting the basic needs of the people within the community. And you can determine for yourself what extent that you want to continue to rely on the outside and what extent you want to continue to build the local food system. It doesn't leave those decisions to the market. The reason I say it's so important, you know, I couldn't give you an example of something that's working, but I've seen a lot of things that didn't work over the years. And if you get something and you don't have the protection of something like a utility that begins to work, then the people outside, just like they have with organic, then they get interested in this as a profit center, and they will come in and take away your local market simply by undercutting you in terms of price or service or something, until they're able to gain their market share and their foothold in this new profitable market. So food sovereignty gives you the opportunity to protect yourself and say, okay, we can grow this over time. So you can start relatively small with local production and grow that intentionally by encouraging local production.
And if you think about it from that respect, we're already doing that work as a community. The directive of sourcing food locally and being very intentional is a directive that is a shared value throughout the Roaring Fork, that is supported by your municipalities and your local governments. So there's already a space of traction in this conversation. There's already a lot of community investment. There's already a lot of people saying, I desire this. And so starting from where we're at, which I think is an advantage because of all those things, right? That there's really a sense of buy-in. There's a sense of, yes, we want this. And we've seen that over the years as local food production has grown. So I love that answer.
I might want to add here that as the production grows, you can become more efficient when you're handling a larger volume. You can begin to create your own local processing distribution systems. You can provide different alternatives as you're moving to a larger volume. So the system becomes more efficient as you grow, but it doesn't have to be competitive all the way through that process of becoming more efficient.
And because it's a community food utility supported, you know, everyone screams when you say vertical integration, but if you think about it, that it's us supporting each other's businesses, it doesn't sound so scary. When you look at that piece, if it's a utility, if there's a piece that's housed in the government, then the idea of the tool library grows to not everyone needs a combine, not everyone needs their own equipment, not everyone needs to be their own processor, not everyone has to look for their own distribution resources, because it is vertically integrated through a cooperative model supported by local government. Make sense?
Self-sufficiency is the ultimate of vertical integration.
Right.
You do it all from consumption to production.
Yes, sir.
So when you say utility, that implies that there's some kind of governmental regulation that goes on with this. So my question is, how is, like, what kind of regulation, or does this fit under the model of a government regulated utility, and how is it functionally different than a cooperative?
So the question is, are there functional differences between a community food utility and a cooperative model, and also the regulatory pieces of government programs, or, you know, not really the federal programs, but having a utility. I always like to use the example of the Holy Cross is a energy cooperative where we source our energy from. So you know, it's got a board and there's structures and there's regulations. But John, can you speak a little bit about how the government would be, how our local government, what role they would play in that community food utility?
Okay, let me start with a question on a cooperative. It would function, it could function as a cooperative. Public utilities can function as a cooperative, a government agency, privately owned or investor-owned utilities. But the difference, if you had a cooperative structure, as we've been talking about here, is that when a cooperatives historically have done something that's been successful, when they found a market niche like organic and then local food, when they find a market niche that becomes successful, then the kind of corporations, the private corporations will step in to that market, and they can do it more efficiently because they're not trying to do the public services that cooperatives are committed to. If you follow the cooperative principles, they're committed to community and education and equality of opportunity and democratic decision making and things that impinge their efficiency. So when the cooperative finds something they can do, I just reviewed a new book that's coming out. It's called The History of Retailing or something. He goes through the whole co-op movement and how they started it organic, and then the industrial food system takes it over. They start local, and now they're moving into local. But if you set it up as a public utility, you have the protection so that the outside can't come in, and just because they can do it more efficiently and want to make a profit, and they have the market power that even if in the long run you're just as efficient as they have the power to take that away from you in the short run. And so the public utility gives you the protection. The difference between the government programs we talk about now, I mentioned very briefly, they're very impersonal. And as a consequence of that, there's no sense of confidence and trust between the people that are paying for those programs and people that are receiving the benefits. And what I'm suggesting here is a situation where you could arrange them to have the government food assistance programs come through the public utility so that the funds that are already allocated for food assistance or various kinds that would serve for food assistance, those would come to the utility, and then the utility would decide how best to use those funds. You have to meet some minimum federal standards in order to get permission to use the funds. But I think those funds would by and large provide the foundation, maybe even fully fund the local food utility if you focused on local, raw, minimally processed foods as opposed to the highly processed packaged and pre-prepared foods that people are buying with food stamps or SNAP payments today. So, and I know of I made a presentation in Tennessee, and the person that made the comment was supposed to get back to me, but I know this is possible because they were saying they were getting the SNAP payments into the nonprofit organization, and then the nonprofit then would provide the food for the people who assigned their SNAP payments to the nonprofit. And it's not all that big a stretch from what we're doing now with farmers markets, where we allow SNAP payments to pay for food at farmers markets and give bonuses. So I think we just build on those. I think those are, but a big part of starting with existing government programs, that's already been validated as a public service that the markets will not serve, like public transportation. You know, the reason I related to public transportation is because when you have the natural monopolies like the sewer system and power system, that's different. There's no private provider. But when you look at public transportation, there are private providers of transportation. There's automobiles, taxi cabs, various other things. But they conclude that it's not meeting the needs of everyone. And that's what I'm saying. Those principles have already been established to justify the community stepping in and saying, we as a community, through a public utility, are going to take responsibility for this activity because existing programs are not meeting this need. It's easier to build a case for food security than it is for food sovereignty for everyone. But just like public transportation, you know, anybody can ride the public bus, anybody can ride the public train. So once you have the utility in place, then anybody can get their food from it.
And if you think about it from local government regulations, those are processes, as many of you in this room know, that are participatory. So they don't happen without the input of the community. So looking at Pitkin County, Garfield County, there will be rulemaking that will be step-by-step processes that we could craft. And to the federal piece, CACFP, SNAP, so many other feeding programs, certainly can be utilized as well.
It's a lot like, Medicare Advantage programs or something like this, where in that case, it's the company that's getting public funds, like the Medicare funds, and then they're packaging it in a different way, but they're using government funds, and then they're taking responsibility for administering those funds in a way that's consistent with government programs to hopefully provide added benefits. So in this case, you would be getting government food assistance funds, but you would put in together a local package through the utility that would better meet the needs of the local people and would help create local food sovereignty.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Miss, your earlier comparison to cooperative electrics was an interesting one because they started as an economic development effort, not an electrification effort. And also with regard to government regulation, the legislature tend to give them a lot more latitude because they are democratic. I also take the point that co-ops often get stepped on by the marketplace. The reason the electric co-ops were successful in effect was because there was no competition there because nobody wanted to provide electricity in rural areas that couldn't make any money. But coming around the bend to this central point that I don't understand, and this is an exciting idea, is what is there about the utility model that prevents other competitors from elbowing it out of the way?
So the question is, what prevents the community food utility model from being overtaken by open market or by market economy?
It's because it's just like another power company can't come in and take over the local power utility, or another operation can't come in and take over the local sewer system. Because once you have the public utility, then you have the power to determine who provides the service and what service is provided. You have the power to determine the quality of service. You don't have to take the cheapest electricity you can get, or you don't have to take the dirtiest water you can get just because it's cheaper. If you've got a public utility, you can say this is the community standards in terms of the health and safety of this issue. You may have some minimum that's required by government, but you're allowed to go beyond that even if it costs more money. So the whole idea of the public utility, it allows you to kind of insulate what you're doing from the overall market competition so that they can't take it over. Nobody can take over your local transportation system unless the city or county or whoever manages public transportation, unless they grant them the right to run a bus or run a train or whatever it is that's being provided to the public sector. Just because someone else can do it cheaper or promises they can do it more efficiently, you say we want to keep this within the community. You have the right to do that, and that's why it's so important, I think, to try to put together something local. I want to stress. I'm saying that the federal and state systems, at least on hunger issue and a lot of other places, simply don't work. They're too impersonal. They're like the markets are impersonal. Markets, are determined by market values determined by scarcity, not necessity. It's going to feed people who can pay for it. In the same way with transportation, the market's going to provide transportation anybody can pay for it. So. The whole purpose of the utility is to allow you to do something that's essential public service and to do it within the community so you can control and protect how it's carried out. Now, I want to say, all of these, I'm not selling this as something that's simple or easy. If you talk about hunger, hunger's been around for 400 years and people have been trying to solve it ever since the English Poor Laws of 1602 or whenever they were. We had a local food system whenever I was a kid growing up in Southwest Missouri, but that food system was transformed. So these things can be done, but I'm not saying it's going to be quick or easy because there's powerful forces that put the current system in place, and there's powerful forces that will try to protect the current status quo. And I'm trying to find some way that if we got innovative, creative people, every one of these public utilities would be different in every community all across the country. But if we get innovative, creative people, really thinking about something, then hopefully we can find a solution.
And we are these people.
What safeguards the utility is the legislature. The So that means the legislature would have to safeguard. Michael, so that John can hear you.
Yeah, John, if I understand correctly, so in the case of the utility, the reason it is protected is because the legislature protects it against competitors, legislature and the Public Utilities Commission. So does that then imply that this model will work only if there are legislative and public and PUC type safeguards, that is from the state level?
John, did you hear that?
Could you hear
No.
that question?
I couldn't hear it.
Oh, okay.
On the
Well,
live stream.
and I do know we have to go on to Woody in a minute.
it's okay.
And yes, that's valid. So his follow-up was, does this have to be legislated? The PUC?
Legislative safeguards against competitors.
Legislated safeguards against competitors is where he's looking for the clarification.
No, you'd simply organize it under whatever existing laws for public utilities. And that's another big reason for me choosing this rather than some alternative. Because every state has some sort of laws that govern public utilities. So you would be organizing under the existing laws. You would just be using the public utility for a different purpose.
We got it, and he's shaking his head. So he says that the answer to that is yes in our state of Colorado. And we do have to keep moving on. I know we've got two other speakers. John, we welcome you to stay and stay in the conversation with us. Do you have any closing thoughts before we move along?
No, it's just, as I say, it's just an idea, and I think whether it works or not, if it has a chance of working, whether it works or not depends upon the local community. There's nothing magic in what I've said. Maybe just spark an idea of what you want to do in your own community. That's an important part of it, because I think we're in the process of fundamentally changing the food system, but it's going to be done a community at a time. Hopefully yours is one of the communities that will help lead the way. Thank you very much for being with you. I'm going to have to sign off and eat supper here after a while, but I'll hang on for a while, okay?
Thank you so much, John.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Next, we're going to have Woody Tasch up on the screen. And Woody had written a book back in, I think, 2005, 2006, called Slow Money. And Brooke Levan really took to that book and brought Woody up here to present to all of us what that meant. And eventually out of this came another book Woody just published called Soil 2017. And the major thing that came out of that for us in this valley is the Two Forks Club. We have Ed Vardy here, who's our current director of the Two Forks Club, and we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've loaned to food entrepreneurs and farmers in this region, in this food shed, for zero interest loans. So Woody, you're there. Can you hear me?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Woody.
All right, good. You see me, hear me, et cetera?
We do.
Yep, we good?
Yep.
All right. Hey, John, I don't know if you're still there. You're not on my screen anymore, but if you're not, I didn't get to say goodbye. We said hello before, though. I'm guessing there's more than one Two Forks Club member in that room. Michael Thompson, I think I just heard him say, the sound was a little garbled for me, but was one of the founding members of the Two Forks Club, which is a slow money club in the Roaring Fork and North Fork of the Gunnison area. And so all I'm going to do is just give a few very general remarks about what we're doing. It's very much in keeping with the spirit of what you just were discussing, just a different strategy, different kind of piece of the puzzle. So, I guess I would just say we have to kind of fire on all cylinders, right? So that was one cylinder we just heard about, like using existing regulatory frameworks to do something different that needs to be done. So that's a beautiful idea. I'm very intrigued by it. In slow money, we're kind of staying below the regulatory radar in a sense and just doing what we can do at a grassroots level right now without needing to make any changes in tax laws, without keeping it super simple, super direct. So all Slow Money is groups of people around the country who are directly collaborating to put some of their money into the local food system. If you're kind of using more financial jargon for that, you'd say we're making below market, usually loans, almost always loans, below market, all the way down to 0% loans, which is what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about in a few minutes. Loans to local organic farmers and the small food businesses that are bringing their produce to the local market. So it's very direct, in general, very small. Around the country, since 2010, which is when the slow money investing started, there were a few years of gabbing before that. We're now over $70 million into around 700 farms and small food enterprises in dozens of communities around the country, in amounts ranging from, this is important, I guess, from a few $1,000s to a few $1 million. Those are individual transactions in that 70 million. So it crosses the gamut from what would technically be called microfinance all the way up to angel investing and kind of everything in between. Now, I'll just drop down from there to talk about what's going on in the Two Forks Club and Boulder. Maybe I should do a little bit more what's going on in Boulder since you guys are there and probably have a pretty good familiarity with Two Forks. But basically, I had the kind of interesting privilege and challenge of watching all this happen very organically around the country, and I never actually started anything in the slow money movement, meaning I was interacting with communities around the country, and that interaction was leading to local self-organizing, which has been really beautiful and also somewhat inefficient. Picking up on some of John's comments about inefficiencies. Inefficiency is really good in some cases. Maybe I would oversimplify and say if we have a choice between efficiency and diversity, we've definitely put way too many eggs in the efficiency basket as a society, right? So we need to kind of we've got to put some more of our eggs in the diversity and decentralized basket, and that is by definition going to be less, quote, efficient by industrial economic standards. So anyhow, I was watching all this beautiful, slightly inefficient thing happen under the banner of slow money, and about 4 years ago now, Susan Brady, I don't know if Susan's in the room or not, but Susan, who's one of the founding members of the Two Forks Club, longtime Aspen Carbondale resident, she'd been coming to slow money national meetings, and she approached me and said, let's do something, we were in Fort Valley. And I suggested this model that is now in force, I guess I'd say, both in Carbondale and Boulder and a few other places. And that model is donations going into a nonprofit, tax-deductible donations in amounts ranging from starting at $250, unless you're a farmer, you can come in for less, but $250 and no upper limit. The money stays in, it's donated capital, so it's a permanent donation. And then the members, the people who give that money, in the year that you give money, you have a vote. Doesn't matter whether you put in $250 or $50,000, you still get one vote. One person, one vote, and then we vote by majority of the members to make 0% loans. Most of the loans are going to local farms, but they're not all farms. There's like a compost business that just got money from Two Forks. It could be a farm-to-table restaurant, it could be a seed company. It could be, making compost tea, or it can be really anything, which is helping the local farmers get to produce the local food and get it to the local market. If you want, I'd have to minimize this and look on my email, but I have Two Forks Club just had its annual loan meeting on February 24th, and they made another $100,000+ in loans. So they're up over $300,000 in total loans now, to maybe maybe around 15 or so. Might be closer to 20 loans now. So these are all, again, 0% loans. If I read the names of some of them, if you want me to afterwards, I can. You probably know a bunch of them. And based on that experience, a couple of years ago, I started doing the same thing here in Boulder, where I live. So I'm kind of a local slow money leader now for the first time, which is great. And we're basically on track, on a similar track. We have to be over around $300,000 now from almost 100 members. Our donations have ranged in size from, we let farmers come in for $25. We're doing it slightly differently here, but that's a detail. Our largest donor is giving us $50,000 a year on a multi-year basis. Again, one person, one vote. My goal in Boulder is to get it up to $250,000 a year coming in. We haven't done that yet. We're up to about $100,000 a year coming in. It's taken a few years, to get the initial thing going. I'd like to think we're going to get there this year, get it up to about 150 members and $250,000 a year. What else can I tell you? In Boulder we call it SOIL, Slow Opportunities for Investing Locally. That's an acronym for all of you linguists out there. And there's another one of these groups springing up in Durango as we speak. There's another one emerging in Charlottesville, Virginia. This is just this particular model, donated capital, 0% loans. Now, before I stop, I just want to remind you that of the $70 million of slow money stuff that's happened around the country, very little of it is going in the soil Two Forks model, because that's a new model for us. But I still consider it kind of an experiment. I mean, it's working. We're wondering if there could be a large number of these Two Forks and soil groups all over the country. And that's kind of, in a sense, my job as the steward to kind of see if it can replicate. I hope it can, because it seems very promising. I can tell you, as Michael Thompson will, I think, attest, being in the room when we're making these 0% loans, it is a wildly positive, and everyone leaves, there's lots of smiling, let's put it that way, which is hard to do when you're dealing with money. So I think we're on the right track. What else? I'll stop these remarks and just start answering questions. But the second book Michael mentioned, Soil, it has 2017 on the cover, but the official title is Soil: Notes Towards the Theory and Practice of Nurture Capital. The reason I'm mentioning that is that, to me, the larger idea here is, like, what are we going to do when we slow some of our money down? What are we going to do when we bring some of our money back down to earth? We're going to take care of one another in places where we live. So in a sense, a broader vision is this idea of nurture capital, of using our money to take care of one another as directly and locally as possible. And I'd like to think that 50 years from now, that might be a pretty standard, let's say, leg on our financial stool, along with investing in philanthropy, but that remains to be seen. Okay, I think that's enough from me as a general overview. Happy to answer questions, and if you want, I could go find that. I can go read you the list of the local deals that were just done, if people are interested to know, who are the recent recipients of 0%.
We actually have Eden here, and so we can we can even list some of them. There was the Diamond G, a couple of young guys at the Living Farm, and they are doing a new poultry operation. Colorado has a new law that allows on-farm poultry processing, and so they're looking to ramp up quite a bit, which we haven't seen before. And then, Eden, did you want to mention any of the others? We had some local flour providers.
So we did, besides Diamond G, which was the poultry operator, we did a loan for Soil Not Dirt, which is becoming our premier kind of compost producer, predominantly in the North Fork Valley. And what was really exciting about them is that they're serving farms as well as homes. So it's one of the businesses that's actually really serving our farms. We did a loan for Modern West Floral. So that's a local flower company. So it's not just food. We're kind of touching everything that is really based in healthy soil. We did a loan for Forage Sisters, which is a farm-to-table catering outfit out of the North Fork Valley. And there was one more. Michael, who am I forgetting? Oh, and then Zephyros Farm and Garden, which organic produce and flowers. They were actually our first loan recipient 5 years ago, and now we gave them a second loan to mechanize some of their production in order to provide better and more perennial living wages that are with less hard work to their farmers. Cool. So that was this year. And I can give people stats on the last 5 years as well if people are interested in that. But Woody.
Thank you, Eden.
Yeah.
Woody, did you hear much of that? Did you hear Eden's description?
It was garbled. I heard some of the mentions of the individual deals. That was kind of,
Yeah.
I knew that's what he was doing, but I couldn't really make out the rest.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone have of Woody? Woody, I have a question for you. How is the Boulder group doing in terms of loans? How far have they come?
Well, we've had 2 loan meetings so far. The first one was a year ago, right around now, actually, and we made 2 loans totaling about $50,000 then, right? And then we had our second loan meeting in January of this year. We lent roughly another $50,000. We have our third loan meeting coming up in 2 weeks. We anticipate making about another $50,000. So we'll be at about $150,000 in loans. So we've got money in the bank right now. We've got, $150,000 or so in the bank. We're taking it, we're being a little cautious at the beginning because we want to see how the flow is going to be coming in. We're raising the question of whether we want to have a part-time staff person, which is the role that Ed is playing over there. So whether we want to use some of that money to pay for a staff person, we haven't decided to do that yet, but I believe we will at some point here. So that's where we are now.
Thanks, Woody. Anyone else? Anyone have any questions about slow money loans? No, looks like we're good. Haley? Try the microphone, both microphones.
I don't know enough about how it works, but I just did recently, like in terms of the finances, I know it's a nonprofit, but I just joined a slow food group recently in the Pacific Northwest, and they were exploring different options, and someone mentioned that all of the models they'd seen of slow money were direct loans, like you guys would just have it in a bank account, and I'm just curious about that process so I can respond to her.
To their question.
Yeah.
Michael, you need to repeat that question for me.
Sure, I'm coming up to the microphone. So Haley asked if you could describe how some of the non-profit clubs, some of the for-profit clubs work, and was that it, Haley, or?
Well, just whether, because the question or the statement that was given to me was that all of the slow money groups, even the ones that claimed they were zero interest loans, that it really broke down to just being like a person-to-person loan. And I figure that's not inaccurate, but I'm curious what the nuts and bolts are of how that works.
How it works.
Yeah.
So Haley's question for some of the people that she lives among up in Oregon is just how the loan process works and what's the difference between the for-profit clubs and the nonprofit clubs. And one of the things that really struck me when I learned about the for-profit clubs was that a lot of those people putting money into those clubs were not taking it out, and they were not taking their interest profits, but reinvesting them. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, so without getting too far in the weeds, but I will if you want me to, of course, we're trying to keep it just at the 30,000 foot level. So there are 3 ways that money is flowing through the slow money movement. One is the one that we just spent the most time talking about, this new idea of donations and 0% loan. That's the most recent and the smallest of the 3 because it's the most recent model. And it has many advantages, I think, and I wouldn't mind talking about them a little more, I guess, but just say it's democratic, one person, one vote. It allows the $250 donor to participate alongside the $50,000 angel person. It's much clearer with respect to securities law and different thing, and then most importantly, it builds over a long period of time. Because very gradually, if you keep making 0% loans, you lose a few of them, you keep getting money in. The ones that pay back come back, and over a generation, it will grow into a fairly substantial pool of permanent capital for the community. So, okay, let's leave that aside. to answer your question, the two other ways money has flowed through the slow money movement has been through for-profit investment clubs, which started spontaneously. They started in Maine under the name No Small Potatoes Investment Club of Maine. That's what the slow money, that's where the idea of investment club started in the slow money movement. And that is using existing securities law that govern investment clubs and just applying it to the idea of making direct local loans to small farms. And in that model, this is generally true. There's a couple of little tiny variations, but basically people were putting in $5,000 a piece. And there are reasons, because of the ways investment clubs are regulated by the SEC, that drive you to have everybody putting in the same amount of money. There cannot be any paid management for the club, again, SEC rule. And the goal there was to try to make some money. So each club did it a little differently, but generally speaking, they were making either 3% or 5% loans. That's the interest rate on the loan. So they were trying to make loans that would generate interest and that would then deliver some kind of return to the club members. Now, to Michael's point, when I moved to Boulder, I guess I wouldn't waste time on the story, except it's Colorado and it's almost local to you, not quite. So when I moved to Colorado, to Boulder in Colorado in 2012, I joined a slow money investment club that had been organized by Michael Brownlee, who some of you I'm sure know. And it was called Colorado Food Investments. It was a slow money investment club modeled after the group in Maine. And everybody in this club put $5,000 in. I was the 13th member. We ended up growing to about 25 members, a few more. And we were making 3% loans. That's the way that club had been organized. And to Michael Thompson's point, it just kind of became apparent over time. It was like, well, wait a minute, people really weren't doing this for the financial return. We actually weren't going to make a positive financial return, because if you do a bunch of 3% loans and a few of them don't pay back, you are likely to have a negative return on the portfolio. But everybody felt it was successful because we're helping a bunch of local farms and food businesses. And that's actually where the idea for the 0% donation model came to me, was from sitting in that club. And well, we're not really doing it for the actual purpose of taking the returns for ourselves. Now, I want to make clear, not every single person in that club agrees with me, which is why some of them didn't join the new thing that we started. We dissolved that club, we started the soil thing, and a healthy handful of the previous members did join the new thing, but some didn't. Some said, like, hey, I just want to do this as an investment. I don't want to do this charity, and I need to try to make some money. So that leads to the third way that the vast majority of the 70 million has gone into deals has been informal networks. No club at all, no structure at all. Public meetings, people meeting one another, pitch fests, local networking, dinners, peer-to-peer lending, the way Carol Pepe is doing it in North Carolina. So just a whole bunch of different informal ways that people who need money are meeting people who have some money under this loose banner of slow money. And then just either individuals or small groups of individuals are collaborating to make loans directly into those deals. And all of those deals, there's no one size fits all, there's no one interest rates, it's really completely informal. So that's not a club. That's just a network or a movement, however you want to describe it. And that's the way of the 70 million, that's the way 69.8 million, 70 million, or 68.9 million, let's say the 70 million has gone through just networking. Now that is beautiful, but it is very inefficient. And my hope is that this club model will grow because it is permanent. I'll just end these remarks by just highlighting again, one of the challenges we've had in this is that there are a lot of people who would like to see this happen, meaning more local people providing more creative capital to more regenerative, local, organic agriculture, whatever words you want to use. But it's hard for people who can't write large checks to participate. Securities laws, there's a whole bunch of regulations about accredited and non-accredited investors. Basically means, rich people and the rest of us. The soil model actually, sort of bypasses that by using a charitable model. So that doesn't mean we don't want all stuff to keep happening. We do, but we're trying to find some bits of structure that can make it possible for people to collaborate together, pool some money, share learning, share vision, build community, and also build something for the long term. I hope that generally answered the question as it was asked.
Thumbs up, she said. Any other questions? Anything more for Woody? No, I think we're good with questions. Woody, you can hang on if you like. Michael Kinsley is next up. Say what?
Yeah, I'll listen to Michael, I guess, and then I'll sign off. I'll stick around. And, am I going to be able to see Michael?
Yes. If you have to look at the live stream. Did you get that? Do you have the live stream up?
Oh. Well, no, then I'll sign off this one, and then I'll come on the live stream. And
Well, actually, Woody, can you see Michael now?
Yeah, but I need to put this here.
Oh.
Yeah, I can. I'll just stay right.
Let me,
We're going to juggle computers here.
we're going to juggle computers a little.
While they're juggling computers, I just want to say it's really great to be in a room full of zealots again, especially young zealots. This guy right here, I don't know him, but he is definitely a zealot. A bunch of young zealots, including myself, about 45 years ago, overthrew the governments in Aspen and Pickens County and completely recreated them, and it was really fun. You can do it. You can make major overhauls if you get organized well enough. Don't get angry, get organized. Somebody said that several years ago. So the thing I'm going to talk about used to be called the Economic Renewal Program. It was at Rocky Mountain Institute for many years, from from 83 until about 06, and then they got out of the business. But it was called Economic Renewal, and we talked about this stuff and taught it in about 40 different states and several other countries, about 4 or 5 other countries, just as a context for what we're doing here. And I think what this will do, maybe, I'm not even sure how it applies to what y'all are doing, but I think it's a broader context that might help, but we'll see. And I'll do it relatively quickly. So we hear lots of arguments, especially in this valley, about growth. Part of the confusion about the arguments about growth is that the word contains 2 different concepts that are interrelated but are quite different. And one, well, I'll just put a tag on each of those concepts for the sake of the conversation. One is the phenomena of building more buildings and infrastructure and more stuff. So let's just call that, for the time being, expansion. And the other is increasing jobs and income and savings. And for a moment, I'll call that development, jobs, income, and savings. So, now, what most of us want is a net increase in jobs, income, and savings, and that doesn't damage the community or the environment, which is, for me, the definition of sustainable development. So, though development and expansion are interrelated, separating them allows it sort of exposes opportunities. It also exposes a lot of mythology. And one point is that some kinds of expansions, many kinds of expansion, do not result in a positive economic effect to the community. You all know of examples of that you see all around you in this valley. Possibly the second, the most important of the 2 points, however, is that development, genuine development, creation of jobs, income, and savings, doesn't necessarily require physical expansion. So that's a central concept, a central point here. And what that does is it says for communities that aren't physically expanding, is there's a hell of a lot of opportunities that are sort of hidden there. And much of what y'all are doing is exposing hidden opportunities. When I was active up valley 40 years ago, we never imagined anybody would try to grow anything but grass and cows here. So what you're doing is genuinely revolutionary as far as we would have been concerned in those days. So an example of this idea that expansion does not require, that development doesn't necessarily require expansion. It goes way back in the early 80s in Osage, Iowa. The manager of the local electric utility was running into a dilemma because the demand for his electricity was exceeding his supply, so he was going to have to either buy that supply somewhere, big expense, or build new supply, big expense, high cost, raised rates. But they're his friends and neighbors and and relatives that were in this community didn't want to do that. So he started an energy efficiency program for homes and businesses at a time when that was really bizarre to do something like that, especially for an electric utility to figure out ways for their customers to buy less of their stuff. Was pretty heretical. But what it did was, that is making the homes and businesses more energy efficient, was it put local people to work. It avoided rate increases, so it saved money. So there was a net increase, in other words, in jobs and income and savings without Osage expanding in any way. There's no, Osage is a sleepy little town. It's about the same size now as it was when this example was generated. So one-time cost for the energy efficiency then created permanent savings over time, in effect freeing up income, So money that otherwise would have left the community to buy more electricity stayed in the community. We call that plugging the leaks, which term we get from an extension agent in Missouri 30 years ago. We didn't invent that term. It's a founding principle or a foundation principle of this idea of sustainable economic development. Lots of examples of that. What y'all are doing, many of you are doing, some of the examples cited here this evening are consistent with that idea of plugging the leaks. There's a lot more examples of that in the literature that we developed. By the way, there's a paper that I wrote just recently, a retrospective on what we did in Carbondale. We beta tested the idea. The idea consisted of the content I'm describing right now, plus a collaborative process by which to do that. So we beta tested that in Carbondale in '86. And it worked out pretty well, actually. Before that was right at a time when the coal mines were shutting down. A lot of people were freaking out. Oh my God, what's going to happen to our economy? The coal mine is the biggest thing in town. It's going to shut down. We're doomed. That kind of thinking was happening in the community. So they went through this process and came up with 7 or 8 different ideas, which you can read in this paper, which Michael has, which we can figure out how to get access to that. And the paper talks about the basic ideas of economic renewal and the Carbondale example. The point is that the number one priority that Carbondale generated at the time was to build on its arts. Now that sounds ho-hum to you right now because they're doing it and it works. Well, before this process, arts was just, the Carbondale Council on Arts and Humanities existed. They were doing the Mountain Fair for years, but it was still sort of the hippie thing. You guys remember hippies, don't you? What this did was to make it mainstream, make it the core of legitimize arts as an economic development component of the community, even a foundation of the community, as a result of a collaborative process the community went through, which focused on things like plugging the leaks. So the second principle then was emphasizing asset-based development, which is exactly what they did in Carbondale. And I can talk more about examples of that, but I'm truncating this presentation quite a bit. So asset-based development, building on what you already have rather than the conventional economic development form, which is to go grab something outside of the community. If you're a small town, you need a McDonald's, right? Or if you're a little bit bigger, you want a Walmart. Or if you're a city, you want to build a sports stadium. Always drag something in from the outside is the conventional wisdom. This is about building internally. The third point or third principle is to build business by nurturing community. Now, that sounds kind of wishy-washy. It's kind of so business is serious, community is this mushy thing. Well, let's think about that. Why is it hard to do business? And it is hard to do business in this community. What are the multiple reasons? If you're a retailer, for instance, one of the things you're going to say is rent, your mortgage. The other thing you're going to talk about is how hard it is to retain good employees, competent employees who stick around for a long time. Huge problem. So why is that? So this is kind of the Deming 5 Whys thing. You want to dig deeper into it. So why is it that you can't hang on to employees? Well, it's because it's a tough place to make a living plus tough place to raise a family. So why is it a tough place to raise a family. Well, look, housing is so expensive because preschool is ridiculously expensive, or whatever you're doing with your, whatever you do about kids who are before they're in school. So maybe in a given community, like the one we're standing in, one of the most powerful things they could do for economic development is preschool. It's pretty straightforward, actually. It's kind of a heretical idea because it comes around through the back door, but it's a powerful approach. That's just one example of building business by nurturing community. The fourth principle, though, is to collaborate to build the community and its economy. You've heard that word a lot. The word is overused. It's usually misused. Collaboration means bringing in all the collaborators when you're framing the problem, not when you've already developed the solution. That's at least my definition of collaboration. So I could talk about this at length. I won't. A lot of this on my website, which is Kinsley Diplomacy. But I want to make an overarching point about that, and that is some of the things you all are talking about maybe don't need much community collaboration. I'm not sure. You know the answer to that better than I. So you may not need to do that because it's a big thing to go about. And Gwen knows about this stuff. She's done it a lot too. But the extent to which you need others to support your initiatives, do not expect them to believe in your philosophy, in your politics, in your terminology. Don't get seduced by the romance of your ideas. There's a whole lot of people that you may need to convince who don't care about any of that romance. So what's the solution? The solution is to listen to them. What is it do they want and need? Listen to them carefully, and then look for ways in which what you're doing serves what they already want and need. It's an old community organizing tool from the 50s in Chicago and Saul Alinsky, which is, if you want people to join you, join them first. It's a very powerful concept that Will Evans knows a lot about. One other point I wanted to make too is to keep your eye on the result, the desired outcome. For instance, this idea about a food utility is really powerful, really exciting, really interesting, and it's going to take years and legislation. So that's a mechanism to get to what you want. So if you choose that mechanism, also be looking at other mechanisms. It's a more resilient approach, because that one's going to take years and you may run out of steam while you're going after it. So that's a real quick and dirty version of what economic renewal is. Any questions?
Michael, I have a...
Yes, sir.
Could you
Mr.
talk
Thompson.
Could you talk a little bit about a lot of what we see these days? Most recently, the controversy over Amazon opening HQ2 in Queens and how the local community reacted and what that all means in this context.
So I didn't follow that particular one except very superficially, but I think the impression I got is that the locals thought that the net effect was a negative one. Next case.
Right, but then the government of
Right.
New York City
Right.
and New York State were concocting $3 billion in tax subsidies for Amazon because they wanted jobs.
So when I talked about expansion and development, another way to talk about expansion is throughput. What community leaders, especially city councils, etc., get seduced by is the idea of maximizing fill in the blanks. Sales tax dollars, housing starts, those kind of metrics, the conventional metrics that only measure a portion of what's important to the community. Bushels of wheat, barrels of oil, tons of ore. The conventional economic development is those are the only measures of success. Everything else is ancillary and not important and just kind of flaky. And so we don't think about cost of living. We don't think about the cost of housing. We don't think about the effects of increasing throughput like that Amazon on the cost of housing. And they were thinking about it. And there's lots of documentation on that. One of the things that inspired RMI to get into this Hunter Lovins and I principally, was oil shale development that was proposed in the 70s and into the early 80s in western Colorado. Most of you probably weren't here for that. But that was going to be this massive development, much larger. It would have required something like half the heavy earth-moving equipment in the country to do what they were talking about as a medium-scale scenario. It's the scale that we're talking about. So we said to ourselves, gee, that sounds like a really bad idea. Is there an alternative? And so that's what got us into thinking about this idea. Half the heavy earth-moving equipment in the country.
Shake the ground is getting.
Yes, right. Other thoughts. Forgetting even forgetting whether oil and gas is a good idea. That just setting that completely aside. Does that scale of activity a real positive effect on the communities? Nobody else? No? Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. So we're actually at, what time is it? My clock doesn't.
You got a lot of time.
6:18, so we have some time left over for any other questions. We also have low battery on my camera, so I'm going to go plug it in. And we're doing this little currency game back there. I see that some people have brought articles in. And so the idea of the game, for those who weren't here at the first section, is that we're anyone who produces things that other people would would enjoy consuming would create sort of IOUs or little tags or cards or something like that represent those things. So just as the examples that I brought were a couple of bottles of a particular batch of homebrewed beer at the very end there, and one loaf of bread. Those are two of the things that I make myself quite a bit, and so I brought some little tags to trade with anyone, because if I have 24 of those bottles at home, and I can make as much of that bread as I want to, and so however many of my certificates I trade away for other certificates today means the amount of beer and bread I will bring at the last meeting to trade in, what do you call it, for people to trade in the IOUs that I give them this time. The idea of this is that you could make your own stuff, make your own little IOUs, you could hand them out to people as future capital, right? It's things that you will come and collect later. Those people could take those currency, those little notes, those IOUs, and go out in the community to someone else who knows about it and say, hey, I'll trade you one of these for one of the things you have. And on it goes. So that functions, you want to do that? So that functions in a way like money. It's kind of money you can make yourself. It has nothing to do with the dollar. It has nothing to do with anything except it's a certificate for something that is produced in the future. And that makes it fun. There's a number of examples back there for people to trade. I'm going to pull out my IOUs and go trade. But anyone have any questions or comments about this whole process, this whole meeting process we're having? And anyone want to express their ideas about what a local economy means to them, where they could benefit from it, how they might participate in it? Anyone have any ideas about that? Eden.
I'm curious, Michael, what do you have kind of an ideal outcome or a scenario that you wanted to see come out of this?
Coming out of the whole conversation, I do have an idea for what I'd like to see. It isn't a definitive idea. It's really just a continuation of the conversation into subgroups of people that will work on different things. So, you're Christine? Christina, there you are. You had sent me an email this morning about local currencies, that you're very interested in that. And so am I. And we're going to cover that on the third session on April 18th. We're going to cover all the research that I've done and a few others have done in that realm. And I would love to see us adopt a local currency. There was an attempt to do it in Carbondale with the Carbondale Spud, but it sort of fizzled a little. And there's a lot of writing and internet stuff that's been put up since then of other communities that we'll cover in a couple of weeks, and how they've done it and what it's meant to them. And it's pretty profound. People really have a great time with it. Most of the local currencies in the United States, and literally there's like 150 of them, operate as a connection to the dollar. And if you're using local currency, let's say as a business, you accept local currency for some services or products, you're supposed to count that as income in dollars. So that's why the local currency is tagged to the dollar. But there are other communities I've read about and communicated with that are seeking local currencies that are not connected to the dollar. And that is a whole area I'm very interested in, because it has meaning beyond everything we've been talking about, and could really lean heavily toward John Eichard's suggestion of sovereignty or some degree of autonomy in a community where we decide how things are going to happen, how tax is going to be collected for local things. So that's my primary interest, plus those things I brought are an example of my gift economy, and I'm really just looking for more gift economy partners when it really boils down to it. Yes, Michael?
To put that in another way of putting that in context, years ago I worked with a woman from Vermont who was doing work similar to what I just described. She has a little consulting firm up north of Burlington. And she did in graduate school an economic analysis of a town on, what's that big lake right there? Somebody?
Lake Champlain.
Lake Champlain. Thank you. On the New York side, there's a little town just north of Fort Ticonderoga. I think it's called Ticonderoga. Anyway, she did an analysis. It was a little funky town, like lots of funky towns around here. What she did was to quantify the subsistence economy, the informal economy, subsistence/informal economy in this town, in economic terms. In conventional economic terms. Turns out it was effectively the largest employer in town by a significant margin. It was the biggest part of the economy. And it was all under the IRS radar. It was fascinating. And the reason I say that is because things like Michael's talking about with his bread and beer may sound, and they will sound, insignificant to a lot of people in the community. In fact, they can have a massive effect upon a community economy. It ain't just money.
I've always recently been thinking along the lines that we live in a global company store. It's like we all work for one currency, and we all use that currency to buy literally everything that we need, everything, except for, some people in this room, some people in this valley who produce things and trade them or sell them, like all the young farmers that are feeding us through the farmers market and their CSAs. All of that stuff is, locally produced. It's healthier. We all know the benefits of it. And if there are people that are making it but not making it for money, like in my neighborhood, the gardeners in my neighborhood, we trade things. Somebody grows kaboka squash and I grow carnival pumpkins, and we trade. He grows too many and I grow too many, and so it works out just great. And I'd mentioned it to the first group a few weeks ago that I had a client once, and we did some work for them. A family that bought a ranch over in Edwards, above Edwards, and came to Jerome Osentowski and I and said, can you, design for us how we can produce everything we need? And when I dug a little deeper in conversation with them, it was really, they were coming from Los Angeles and they were moving here, and they were feeling like the world is coming apart at the seams, and they need an Armageddon retreat, a place to go when Mad Max is what happens to the world. And so we started talking to them, finding out what this underlying idea was, and started asking them, well, have you looked at the rest of this valley and what ranchers are raising sheep, which ones are raising hogs, which ones are raising cows, who's raising wheat, You know, who's raising all the things that you can, and then you can focus on a certain number of things that you kind of specialize in, and then you can trade with them. And so you then become a community rather than an enclave. And they just latched right onto that idea, and they're over there producing. They've got high tunnels and gardens and all that stuff. But it was, you know, it just shifted their perspective from protect us from the world to participate in this local community. And so that's kind of what we're trying to bring forward in this conversation series. So anyone have any other thoughts you want to offer before we disband and trade? No? Okay. Anyone have any thoughts about what they want to see in the third session? We are currently planning to have Casey Pascura is going to be here to talk about gardening and seeds. We have Stephanie here and Signa, who Stephanie started our basalt seed library, and Signa is carrying it on and making us all save a lot more seed than we ever did before. And you can borrow the seed that a lot of gardeners in this town and other towns around the valley have contributed to the library. That seed is virtually all of it is well acclimated to this environment. So it's been grown and seed collected and regrown for years. And so it's very robust. All the lettuce and the broccoli and the kale that's out there is really great to take. And you can join our Seed Savers Club and learn how to save seed and contribute to the effort. I think that's all I had for now. We're also going to cover the local currencies and the sharing economy, which Signa has also started a pretty big group on Facebook, Buy Nothing Roaring Fork, where if you have a need, you can post it. If you have something in excess, you can post that. And it's a pretty lively conversation area where objects are trading hands without money at all. And I think it's working out great. I have a few things I need to post there to get rid of and put in the hands of someone who used them. So did you have any other thoughts, Signa, about the third session we're going to do?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay. All right. We'll sign off. And yes, Christina.
About the cryptocurrency that they tried.
Yeah.
And what happened with it, and what are some, like, you know, who was involved and what they want to do with it, or like if anybody's still out there.
The Carbondale Spud is listed on the local currency list, and I do have a link to that. But by the way, Michael had asked a question before of me that I wanted to make sure everyone understood, that if you go on the Basalt Library calendar, and you go to today, there's a posting there of this talk we're having right now. And if you click on that posting, it opens up and there's a link. And that link will take you to my cloud, where I have over a dozen papers listed there that you can download. And one of them is Michael's, one of them is John Eichard's paper, and it's a PDF file that you can download and read.
If I may add to that, when we were doing this work at RMI, we wrote, I forget, 7 or 8 books, pamphlets, in the 100-page realm, and lots of papers, all of which were pre-PDF days. We did it cuneiform on clay. It was a little earlier. You remember that, don't you? Yeah. So recently we've scanned all of them, and so they're going to be available on PDFs on the RMI website sometime soon. I'm not sure when. But the only point of telling you that is that there's hundreds of examples of cool stuff that people were doing in communities then. That was 25 years ago. And then, by the way, the Presidio Graduate School, those guys are doing some brilliant work out in San Francisco. They are probably going to do a project to recreate these ideas in current form, where they're going to go through using the same principles and find the current examples. That's a couple years out, probably. But FYI, that's all.
And the Carbondale Spud is listed on this exchange of local economies. There's a link to that list, but it's listed there as inactive. And Will, did you have anything you wanted to add about the story there?
Laurie Stone. And
And then Russ Criswell tried again. Time dollars, Edgar Consworth. And I could just say a little bit about that. The interesting thing about that is that it's all a contract of the heart. And so the IRS has looked at it 3 times and they said, contract of the heart? That's like fairy dust. We can't tax that.
Which form does that go on?
And so, you know, that's been around a long time, and he's a very wonderful guy.
And the other, by the way, is that woman I referred to who did the study about the town at Lake Champlain. She's still at it. It's called Yellowwood Associates. She's got all kinds of resources with lots of cool stuff. She's doing it in Vermont and in Byron's. Shana Ratner. Yellowwood
There's
Associates.
another one that Michael will be talking about is the Ithaca Hours, which Paul Glover.
Paul Glover, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that's been a long-standing local currency.
Yeah, you're aware of that one, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, the gift economy, which is my favorite. And I do have a stash of different flavors of beer that I've brewed over the years, and they're just sitting in my cellar waiting for the IRS to come to me and tell me that they need me to pay some income tax on that, in which case I'll say, well, here's the beer. There's no money at all in it, because I can't sell homebrewed beer. Yeah, how many bottles you want, yeah. Can I photograph you taking them? So, any other questions or comments? Well, thanks everyone for coming, and
So, if you would like to go ahead and participate in the game that Michael told you about earlier, but perhaps you didn't come prepared, you didn't bring coupons to share and trade, there are some yellow Post-it notes in the back and some markers. You're welcome to make up some coupons right now for either the items that you produce or the services that you'd like to offer, and then you can use those to share with other members here tonight. All right.
we may end up just opening it up for the third session to anyone bring anything you made. And forget the IOUs and just go straight to the goods. That's another way to do it. There's a group in Denver on the Front Range, they're all over the Front Range, called Mile High Swappers. And they, several times a year, if not more, they just post on their website or their Facebook page, we're all going to meet this Saturday at this parking lot in this town. And people come, bring their tables, their little tents, and they just set up their stuff and they go around and trade, and there's no money at all involved. And it's just a lot of fun that they have. Mostly canned goods and breads and desserts and food things. But we could have something like that here too. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it.